December 12th, 2011. It was a night the local police of Waco, Texas would never forget. The 911 call came in at 3:46 a.m. Frantic, disjointed, a young man screaming for help, his words barely coherent. The address was in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind where nothing ever goes wrong. But when officers arrived, they stepped into a scene straight out of a nightmare. Blood smeared across the floors, bodies twisted in unnatural poses, and standing in the middle of it all was Marcus Hall, his hands and clothes soaked in crimson, eyes wide with terror. "I didn't do it," Marcus whispered as they cuffed him, voice shaking. Cade did it." The officers exchanged uneasy glances. There was no Cade on record. There were only bodies, and Marcus. This is the story Marcus Hall gave them. A story so disturbing, so unbelievable, that even now, years later, no one knows for sure what really happened that night.
I was 21, a physics major, spending most of my time volunteering at the college research center. It was the kind of place where I could get lost in experiments, theories, and the quiet buzz of machines. It wasn't just about learning. I needed the extra cash. Between student loans and rent, every bit helped. One day, while leaving the lab, I spotted a flyer on the bulletin board. It was for an experimental drug trial, one that claimed to enhance cognitive abilities. It wasn't just about thinking faster, though. The flyer also promised improvements in personality, confidence, and social interaction. That caught my attention. I'd always been introverted, keeping to myself. The idea of stepping out of my shell was tempting, and the $200 a month didn't hurt either. They gave me 30 pills, one per day, and told me to report any changes. The first 5 days, nothing happened. I thought it was a waste. But by day 7 I noticed something. I was more social, more confident, engaging in conversations and enjoying it. It felt like a strange high, like I was finally free. By the second week I felt unstoppable. I was sharper, more daring, crossing lines I never would have before. Enjoying the rush, I doubled the dose, 2 pills a day. The confidence boost was insane. I felt invincible, like nothing could touch me. But there was a nagging feeling, like I was watching someone else live my life. I didn't know it then, but things were about to get much worse. The rush was addictive. Taking 2 pills a day meant I would run out of the pills sooner than intended, and I needed more. The old me never would have considered it, but one night I made the decision. I stayed late at the lab, waiting for the place to empty. My heart raced, but it wasn't fear. It was excitement. I snuck into the storage room and grabbed another bottle of pills. It felt easy, like I was meant to do it. No hesitation, just pure thrill, like I was in control of everything. After that, I stopped going back to the lab. I didn't care about the trial anymore. I had the pills and that was all I needed. That night I went to a party, something I'd never have done before. The old Marcus didn't go to parties, but that guy was long gone. I was on fire, talking, laughing, charming people like I'd known them for years. And then I met her. She was bold, edgy, completely out of my league for who I used to be. But now I had her attention. At some point I told her about the pills, expecting her to be impressed. Instead, she laughed, unimpressed, and pulled out a bag of cocaine, daring me to try it. Pride got the better of me. I opened one of the capsules, mixed it with the cocaine, and snorted it as if I had something to prove. The rush hit me instantly, more intense than anything before, but it wasn't a high I'd come down from. That was the moment everything started to spiral. The next morning I woke up with a splitting headache and mud everywhere, muddy footprints around my bed, dirty clothes in the washer. I couldn't remember coming home. I figured I must have blacked out from the drugs at the party. That was the only explanation, right? I shrugged it off, convincing myself it was just a bad night. But then the next morning I woke up to the same horrible surprise, only worse. Much worse. This time there was blood. Dark, sticky smears across the floor, leading from the door to my bedroom. My heart raced as I followed the trail. On the couch I saw her scarf, the girl from the party. It was drenched in blood. My hands trembled as I picked it up, the metallic smell hitting me hard. I couldn't remember anything. My mind was blank. Panic took over, and I frantically started scrubbing the floor, trying to clean away whatever had happened. Then I saw it, my reflection in the mirror. For a split second, it wasn't me. That twisted, smirking face staring back, it was someone else. I stumbled back, heart pounding, the smirk gone as fast as it appeared. I didn't know what was happening, but I needed answers. I couldn't remember anything. That's when I decided to install cameras in my apartment. Whatever was going on, I had to know. I barely slept that night, the fear gnawing at me. Every sound made me jump, every shadow seemed to move, but eventually, I dozed off. When I woke up, everything seemed normal. No mud, no blood, just silence. For a moment, I thought I'd imagined it all, that maybe the drugs had messed with my head, Maybe I'd hallucinated the last 2 days, but I couldn't shake the dread sitting heavy in my chest. I rushed to check the footage from the security cameras. What I saw turned my blood to ice. At first, it was just me, lying in bed, asleep. But then, at exactly 3 a.m., I watched myself slowly sit up and get out of bed. Calm, deliberate. I walked toward the camera, my face expressionless until I stopped directly in front of it. Then that smirk, the same twisted, evil grin I had seen in the mirror, spread across my face. I watched, horrified, as I stared into the camera, my eyes dark and unfamiliar. And then I spoke. But it wasn't me. It was someone else. He called himself Cade. He spoke like he was talking to me, telling me he was here now, that he would protect us, me, by hurting anyone who posed the slightest threat to our newfound confidence. His voice was cold, dripping with malice. Then he laughed, a low, chilling sound, before delivering his final warning. If I tried to stop him, if I even thought about it, he'd kill all my loved ones one by one. He said it so casually, so sure of himself. And then he added with a sneer that he'd kill them just like he'd killed the girl from the party. I slammed the laptop shut, my heart pounding in my chest. What the hell was going on? That night, I locked every door, every window, my hands trembling as I secured my apartment. It felt like a futile effort, but I had to try something. I gathered the pills and flushed them down the toilet, praying that somehow this would resolve my nightmare. But deep down, I knew Cade didn't need the pills anymore. He was already in control. When morning came, I woke up to a scene that made my blood run cold. My heart raced as I turned and found a blood-soaked axe lying next to my head. It gleamed ominously in the morning light, the blade caked with dark, congealed blood. Panic surged through me as I realized my bed and clothes were drenched in it, a visceral reminder of horrors I couldn't remember. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. I stumbled to the footage, desperate for answers. My hands shook as I pressed play, my heart hammering in my chest. I had to know what had happened. The footage began with me asleep in bed, the room shrouded in darkness. Then came the moment that shattered any semblance of sanity I had left. At precisely 3 a.m., I watched myself wake up, calm and collected. I got out of bed and walked over to the door, unlocking it with a deliberate ease that sent chills down my spine. I held my breath as I watched, my stomach twisting in dread. I saw myself leave the house and then nothing. Hard in my throat, I pressed fast forward, and at about 6 a.m. I saw myself return, dripping with blood. It streamed down my clothes, soaking into the floorboards, and in my hand, the axe gleamed under the faint light. I could barely breathe as I watched that twisted smirk creep back onto my face, the same one Cade wore in the mirror. I didn't recognize myself anymore. The image of the blood-splattered monster on the screen, laughing at the camera, sent me spiraling. My knees buckled, and I collapsed to the floor, tears streaming down my face. I was losing it, losing my mind, my sense of self. I was terrified, feeling the very threads of my sanity unravel. I curled up on the floor, crying uncontrollably, fear clawing at me. Cade was in control, and I was powerless to stop him. I was a stranger in my own body, and I feared what he might do next. That following night, I was desperate. In a last-ditch effort to stop Cade, I handcuffed myself to my bed, my hands trembling as I secured the cold metal around my wrists. It felt absurd, but I had to try anything. I consumed cup after cup of coffee, chugging energy drinks to keep my eyes wide open. The adrenaline coursed through me, fueling my fear, but fatigue slowly crept in. Despite my best efforts, I eventually fell asleep. When I woke up, my heart sank. The handcuffs lay shattered at my side, broken open as if some superhuman force had torn them apart. Panic washed over me, and I sprang from the bed, a sick feeling churning in my stomach. I knew Cade had been here, that I had failed to contain him. Following a trail of dark, sticky blood that led me out of my bedroom, I felt my skin crawl. I stumbled into the living room, and the sight that greeted me was beyond comprehension. There on the floor lay the bodies of 3 of my friends, lifeless and mangled, their blood pooling around them like crimson ink on a canvas. One friend, Jake, had his throat cut so deeply that it barely hung on by a thread, blood gushing out in horrific spurts. His eyes were wide open in a silent scream, frozen in terror. Next to him, Sarah was sprawled on the floor, her limbs twisted at unnatural angles, her face unrecognizable, a gory mess of flesh and bone. It looked as if Cade had taken his time, enjoying every second of their suffering. Finally, I turned to see Tom, my best friend, his body nearly dismembered, the axe embedded deep in his chest, the handle stained a vibrant red. I could see the horror etched into his features, a last expression of confusion and fear. My stomach churned, and bile rose in my throat as I stumbled back, unable to process what I was seeing. What had I done? Desperate for answers, I stumbled to my laptop and pulled up the security footage. My heart raced as I clicked play. At exactly 3 a.m., I saw it. Cade woke up, his movements eerily calm as usual. I watched in disbelief as he effortlessly broke open the handcuffs, the metal snapping apart like twigs in his grasp. He looked directly into the camera, sneering, his face a mask of fury that screamed, "I warned you." Cade then slipped out of the apartment, and I held my breath, dread filling my chest. I fast-forwarded again, my heart racing until the clock ticked closer to 6 a.m. My stomach twisted when I saw Cade return, dragging my friends behind him one by one. They were bound and seemed drugged, their eyes glassy and vacant, struggling against their restraints but too weak to fight back. He tossed Jake onto the floor like a rag doll, followed by Sarah and Tom, their bodies limp, panic written across their faces as they began to regain consciousness. But it was too late. Cade moved with chilling precision. He didn't waste time. He grabbed the axe, a glint of madness in his eyes, and one by one he slaughtered them, their screams echoing in my mind. Blood sprayed across the walls, pooling around them, painting a gruesome picture of betrayal and horror. After the last blow fell, he calmly wiped the axe clean, a sinister satisfaction emanating from him. Then he walked back to my bed, the blood still dripping from his hands, and slipped back under the covers, a devilish smirk plastered across his face. I couldn't breathe. I was paralyzed by the reality that I had unleashed this monster. My friends were dead because I had let Cade take control. The camera recorded it all, each moment of terror a testament to my failure. The world around me spun as I grasped the enormity of what had happened, and the sheer hopelessness of my situation clawed at my insides. Cade was real, and he was in control. At that moment, I knew the only way to stop Cade was to turn myself in. I had to get help. With shaking hands, I picked up my phone and dialed 911. I told the operator everything, desperate for them to understand that Cade had taken over, that I wasn't responsible for what had happened. I felt sick, surrounded by the bloody remains of my friends. This was no longer just a nightmare, it was my reality. As they cuffed my wrists, I felt the cold metal tighten, and the reality of my situation crashed down on me. I was being led away from the horror of my own making, but Cade was still there, inside me. His laughter echoed in my mind as I stepped outside, leaving behind the bloodshed, knowing that the nightmare would never truly end.
As the months passed inside the cold, confining walls of the prison, Marcus felt the weight of his decision. He had surrendered himself, hoping to cage Cade within him, to shield the world from the nightmare he carried. But Cade was relentless. No cell could hold him. The violence began again, and soon the prison was gripped in terror. 3 inmates lay dead, their bodies twisted in grotesque shapes, broken by a strength far beyond human. Marcus would hear the guards whisper about him, about the madman in cell 23 who smiled after each death, whose laughter echoed through the halls when they found the bodies. They tried solitary confinement. They tried force, but Marcus would only laugh, staring through the iron bars with dead eyes. "What are you going to give me? Life?" he taunted them. His voice was a chilling mockery. He had already received the maximum sentence. Nothing more could be done. But then, something changed. There were prisoners, young men mostly, who were days away from release. He watched them from the shadows of his cell, men who had made mistakes but were on the verge of getting a second chance. And Marcus knew. Cade would not let them leave. Cade would break them, just as he had broken everyone before. He could feel the darkness stirring inside him, itching for the chance to strike again. The visions haunted him. The blood, the broken bones, the lifeless eyes. He couldn't allow it. Not this time. That night, Marcus sat in his cell, staring up at the ceiling, feeling the noose he had fashioned from torn bedsheets tighten around his neck. His hands trembled, not out of fear for his life, but for the lives Cade would soon take. He thought of the men who still had a chance, who didn't deserve what was coming, and with that thought, he stepped off the edge. The silence that followed was deafening. As his body swung gently in the stale prison air, for the first time in years, Marcus felt something close to peace. He had won, in a way. He had denied Cade his final triumph. When the guards found him, there was a strange expression on Marcus's face, one they couldn't quite understand. A small smile, frozen in death. Marcus had taken control for the last time. For more horror, scary stories, please subscribe.